Our guest today on Meinl Radio is Meinl Cymbals artist and Meinl stick and brush artist John Hammond. As you'll find out from our conversation, John is a veteran of the Nashville session world. He has spent the last 35 to 40 years either in a studio or on the road, mostly in a studio, and has played, by his estimation, on somewhere between 40,000 to 50,000 songs. He spent a lot of time recording his drum parts for Southern gospel and contemporary Christian music artists. While these genres are huge in terms of the business that they do, there are probably going to be some of you out there listening who aren't familiar with them. It's no matter. Throughout the course of our conversation, John gives a great inside look at what these genres are all about. As you would expect from a top call in-demand Nashville session musician, John's extremely talented. His touch and feel are impeccable, and his sense of dynamics and knowing what to play and when to play are a big part of what makes him so in demand. He's also one of the most laid-back and kindest individuals I've met. For any of you that are repeat listeners to this podcast, there's a chance that you might have grown tired of hearing me talk about how nice someone is, but there's a real reason for that. When people ask what I look for in an artist, I tell them that first they have to be a really good person, and then second they have to be a good drummer. Actually, I can't hammer this point home hard enough, and forget me talking about endorsements. Let's widen the lens here and look at the bigger picture. If you want to truly have a real career playing music, you can't be a great drummer and a problematic person to deal with. You have to be a great person first and a great drummer second. I mean, you can even be a less than 100% great drummer, but still a great person, and chances are you'll work way more than the clown who's a great drummer and a miserable human being. I've seen it all too often to ignore it, and while it seems completely obvious, you'd be shocked at how many people in life just don't get this. So don't be a person that people go out of their way to avoid. Bring a really positive light to all of your interactions, and I guarantee that a lot of good will come from it, like working as a drummer. John Hammond is a total case study in this regard. On to the podcast. I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Radio Podcast. Today we have longtime Meinl Cymbals artist and relatively new Meinl stick and brush artist, John Hammond. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for asking me to be. I'm excited about this.
So, John came my way via a mutual friend and a former partner of Meinl's, Gary Forkham, who used to own the world-famous Forks Drum Closet here in Nashville, Tennessee. And so one day Gary calls me up and tells me, hey, I've got a Gotham buddy who also happens to be a really happening session drummer in town, and he's not happy with what's going on cymbal-wise in his world right now. You think you'd take a look? And I'm really glad Gary called me and asked me that because it's been a great relationship. And if everybody was as, just easy as you, it would be really nice.
Yeah, my wife might disagree, but still, we'll continue.
Well, I don't have to go back and hang out at your house with you. So
that's true.
Yeah. For the limited amount of time we have, right. It's always easy.
Yeah, oh sure.
So I'd like to just speak with you about what is a really, and I'm not making you out to be old. I'm just making you out to have had some history.
I am 60 years old. I'm not going to shy away from that. I've been doing sessions, exclusively sessions, for almost 35 years. So I've seen a lot.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm really interested to speak to you about what you have seen.
Right.
So you broke into the Nashville scene in roughly late 1986, correct?
As a session player, yes.
Yes, okay. And you were in your mid-20s at the time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was born in 60, so yeah, I was.
Okay. And then prior to that, you'd been on the road for about 5 years with an artist named Russ Taff.
Correct.
He's a gospel singer and songwriter.
Right.
And can you give us some background on yourself as far as what led to the long-term road gig with Russ, and then what led to you breaking into the Nashville session world?
Yeah. I will start by saying, because this will factor in, my older brother, Mark, is also a drummer. Mark was in town before I was and started off doing, he was one of the early studio drummers on lots of the contemporary Christian records at that time. The artists then were artists like Sandy Patty or Larnell Harris or Steve Green or whoever that were making, and Amy Grant, people like that that were making a lot of records then. So that being said, Mark was already in Nashville. I was at school at Valdosta State College in Valdosta, Georgia, and at the time was in school and not even a music major. I was a pre-law major at the time because I mentioned Mark. my mom didn't want me to play drums because Mark was so good from a very, pretty much child prodigy from a very early age. That my mom steered me away, just didn't want me to be in his shadow because, again, he was extremely good and obviously gifted from a young age. So, and I was like, well, whatever, and so I think I started on trombone and that didn't last. But
why did she steer you away if you were inspired by his playing and wanted to?
Well, just because, again, he was darn near a child prodigy and just very, very obviously gifted.
So she was worried that
wouldn't be that I was not going to be, because I was 2.5 years younger.
She thought your self-esteem might take a hit because of it?
Exactly. So she was being protective in that sense. And that lasted, and again, he started playing when he was probably 4, and, the pots and pans things, the stories you can imagine from little kids, and, gets his first little, cardboard drum set from Kmart. I remember that. This with gold lame kind of weird looking thing, all plastic, But I'm just like, I'm whatever I am, 2.5 or 3, and so but again displayed an obvious gift at a very young age, and so that was why. And she didn't mind if I just played around and did stuff with him, but when we got a little older, she was thinking, well, he's obviously gonna be something musically, and she just wasn't aware because I wasn't dedicated to it. Mark was the guy who was constantly practicing, and I'm just I'm just an idiot kid, just whatever, and I would pick up his drumsticks and stuff. When he got to high school, like I said, I played trombone in what would have been called the beginner band then, and then even into the middle school band, and then it's trombone. I wasn't interested, and wasn't really, I was just content to kind of do something else, although I was still playing because Mark's drums were always set up in his bedroom or whatever. I get to high school rather, and Mark gets in the marching band, and he's writing stuff, and and then he would come to me and go, hey, I'm working on this cadence for the marching band, play this part, and so okay, so he'd play this and I'd play this, and then we'd work it out, and he would go, this is great, and I'm not trying to make anybody look bad, but he would get to the school, and none of the other drummers could play it, so that's when essentially Mark went to my mom and said, you've got to let John play drums because none of these people can play these parts, and so that's kind of how it happened. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, my own little private joke is I wasn't even the best drummer in the bathtub as a kid, so and that's but it's true. It's like your perspective. I mean, he's just my goofy older brother. I had no idea that, what I mean? It's like he's just my brother, and so I wasn't aware that he was a world-class drummer, And so as we're, growing up, and it kind of becomes obvious that he's incredibly good, and it comes, somewhat obvious that I've got a bit of a gift as well. At that point, he had already started taking lessons and studying with who was at the time the principal percussionist in the Atlanta Symphony. His name was Jack Bell, and that was a very difficult, to be able to study with Jack Bell. You had to audition and do all this other stuff, and that was coveted. And then I started playing, and Mark and I guess my mom went to Jack and said, will you teach John too? And he said, sure. So both of us studied with Jack Bell for a while, which was an amazing thing. An amazing teacher, obviously an amazing player in the Atlanta Symphony. And so I got that side of the education in terms of reading, and we didn't really delve into lots of the orchestral perk. It was more just reading and fundamental stuff and technique and things like that. Mark went further than I did. He studied some mallets and some other things like that, but mainly it was reading and things, for me. And even so, fast forward a little further, even when I go to college, I was just like, well, I'm not gonna pursue this. I was a pre-law major. Became apparent quickly that wasn't the route for me. Just wasn't happy with that at all. And I'll just, if I may, I'm a man of faith. It's like, to me, it was a God thing. I was just like, I kind of dropped out of school because I literally had taken every course that was not applicable to a specific major. And I got to the point where my advisor said, you got to pick something. There's nothing for you to do unless you pick a direction, pick a major and go that way. And so I was like, well, then I think I'm not sure what I want to do. So I'll hit pause on the college education. And right about that time, some friends from church started a group. That group is called New Song. They went on to become Christian recording artists. So it was kind of an interesting thing there. And they were playing music. They were it was a quartet. And so they were kind of They styled themselves after a group called the Imperials. Not Little Anthony and the Imperials, but there was a Christian gospel group called the Imperials. That group, the Imperials, was pretty much on the forefront of what we would call modern contemporary Christian music. Michael Lamartian produced those records, and it was all the great session players. It was, they were really, really extremely good records, well done, LA records in the 80s,
I was going to ask, where was the contemporary Christian scene based out of that
lot of it here in Nashville,
okay.
And then some obviously in LA. That was kind of the thing. And I say that, and I don't want to try and be hard to not sound like I'm dismissing any art form or whatever, but lots of what people think of as gospel music is Southern gospel. It's very country. It's very simplistic. It's very even come out of the hills kind of a thing. Not bluegrass, but just kind of it's very stylistically that way. These records were extremely deep. I mean, just like I said, great players. All the players that we all heard a lot of in the day, and so in the Imperials was a singer named Russ Taff. And then they did 2 records that Michael Lamartian produced, which were great records. They did extremely well. They were just, huge records. And then Russ decided to go off on his own. And that's when when Russ did that, they called my brother and said, hey, you want to play with Russ Taff? And Mark was like, well, I'm kind of doing the session thing. I got a little brother.
Now, was Mark in Nashville by that time?
Yes, he was. I'm sorry.
Okay, gotcha.
He came here. Mark played it along with thousands of other musicians. Played at Opryland when there was an Opryland. That was a theme park here for those who don't know. Live music theme park, lots and lots of. Whereas Mark also played at the theme park Six Flags Over Georgia. That particular park just had a couple of live music things and lots of rides. Opryland was tons of live music
and a few rides.
Yeah. So it was a whole different kind of thing. But so Mark was in that, and they were really good players because it was, like a lot of people that get out of college, they're like, what am I going to do? They come to Opryland. So there was a lot of good musicians there, a lot of people that Mark went on to do lots of sessions with that, also went on to have great session careers. I can think of a bass player, Craig Nelson, that played with Mark then, and I literally did a session with him yesterday. So it's like still, to this day, or at least people are working and still busy. So anyway, so Russ Taff people called me. I drove up, auditioned with them, got the gig, and for about 6 months or so, commuted from North Georgia, Summerville, Georgia, where I grew up, and then moved up here. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly when that was because it's a little gray as to where, but it's roughly 83.
So you got on the road and you toured with Russ for about 5 years, and that was prior to establishing yourself as a session player at Nashville.
Correct.
So when you were driving up here, back and forth, making the commute from North Georgia to Nashville, it was simply to rehearse and then get on the bus and go with Russ?
And go, yeah.
Okay.
There weren't that many gigs because Russ had just left the Imperials, and so, like I said, there wasn't a call for me to move at that point because it just,
How often would you gig with him?
Hard to say. It would be, maybe a weekend here, and then maybe a month off, and then, it was literally very, very sporadic.
So what did you do with your time off back down in North Georgia?
I just,
Just hung out at your mom's
yeah,
house?
hung out at the house and mowed the yard and did whatever, and, practiced. And
well, it's hard to keep a job when you're waiting for gigs to come through.
Yeah, and and I even tried to, when I did, it was still a little slow when I did finally move. Tried to get a job here. I remember applying at like I can't remember the name of the Ruby Tuesday restaurant, and the manager there, of course it's Nashville, and they understand the whole music thing, and the guy literally said, "I'll hire you right now if you can tell me you're not going to leave as soon as you get a gig."
Come on.
And I said, well, sir, I can't tell you that.
Sounds like he's the only non-understanding guy in Nashville.
Well, he probably had been burnt before, and just was like, and they're not going to invest all their time in training somebody.
Yeah, I get it. Well, when you moved up here, did you live with your brother?
No, where was Mark? He got married pretty young, but I don't think he was married quite yet. He was living, probably had the roommate, and I had the Russ Taff's road manager at the time, knew people, and so I literally just crashed on the floor for a while whenever I would come up, and and then one of the people there ended up moving out, buying his own house, and invited me to say, hey, happy to rent you a room, so I did that for a couple of years, and before I bought my first house, and I guess it would have been 89 or something like that. But
so as Russ's career picked up, did your touring pick up?
yeah, absolutely.
So within that 5-year stretch before you decided to really pursue the session scene, I guess I should say by the end of it, right before you decided to exit his band, how much were you touring at that point?
His career had grown to where there were actual tours, and by that time he had done his second record, which is a record called Metals, which was also just extremely, what's the word, respected. It's a great record. Lots of people still listen to that. It's just like, and so there was the Metals tour, and it was an official tour with, tour jackets and, a tour manual and all the, and it was the end of that was about the time that I remember getting a call from a keyboard player named David Hunsinger, who worked with Mark a lot, and Mark couldn't do this particular session, and then so David called me, and I'd been working with him. I actually got my first record I ever played on. Mark was booked on the session and invited me to come by, and told the producer, he said, "Hey, I want my brother to play on this track," and Mark was there. And just said, "Hey, let John play on this track." And the guy's like, "Well," Mark said, "if it's bad, I'll fix it," And so the guy's, "All right, whatever." So, and it thankfully wasn't bad, and they kept it on the record. I think I did 2 other tracks,
Wow.
But that's my brother. I mean, he's is always trying to help,
Well, they say it's all who you know, and
Yeah.
in this instance, it's really who you knew.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. I would never begrudge anybody that kind of sort of. You still had to do all the heavy lifting and the hard work to become a good drummer. Mm-hmm. And you still had to be the kind of person that people wanted to hire and have that personality around. So you had the attributes. As far as getting your foot in the door, that's where it can be difficult for some folks. Did you ever run into any people who maybe had resentment and called it nepotism or anything like that?
Well, no, but I always made it clear, as I got a little more successful, obviously people would call me, and even to this day. Well, there was a kid on the session yesterday, young guy, and Craig Nelson and I were sitting there in the lounge in between songs, and he came out and said, "What do you do? How do you break into the biz?" And, of course, I mean, and that's probably the 1,000th time I've been asked that question. I mean, people just call me out of the blue. And I always have to tell people, I say, well, the way I did it is not likely the way you're going to do it, because I had this built-in calling card. I had an extremely busy working drummer brother, who, when he couldn't do a session, would say, "Hey, I can't do it. Call my brother."
So did people think that they were going to get a drummer that sounded like Mark?
I don't know that they did as much as they just took him at his word. Okay. And I think even early on, I know for a fact early on, a few of them, he would say, "Hey, use John. If it's bad, I'll fix it. I'll come in and I'll redo it."
Well, did you ever have an artist that thought, you're good, but you don't sound like your brother?
Thankfully, no.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Even though Mark and I are stylistically different players, Mark was much more a fusion kind of a technical kind of guy. I mean, it's like, I would compare him, and I know a lot of people who are listening to this are going to go, "Yeah, right." Mark was much more like a Weckel or that kind of a player. I mean, the technique, just unbelievable,
Whereas you were more of a Porcaro?
I'm not about to compare myself to Porcaro, but stylistically. And,
that's what I mean, stylistically.
Yeah, those were the guys I listened to.
Yeah.
And Carlos Vega, Porcaro, Gadd. In a different way, Gadd's a little different player. Ed Green. I mean, it's like Mike Baird. It's like there are all these cats, and they're mostly LA guys.
Yeah.
Handful of guys from Atlanta that a lot of people would never have heard of. There's a guy named Brian Holmes who played with a band called The Producers. That's a phenomenal drummer, great records. Drummer named Barry Borden who played with Mother's Finest, and that's like that one Mother's Finest record. I wore it out. It's like rock funk thing. He's an unbelievable player, But then all the other ones, like I said, all the LA guys I mentioned. But yeah, even though I appreciated drummers who had that kind of technique, like a Weckel, we grew up listening to Buddy Rich. I mean, in the mid '60s, Mark had those records, and Mark could get awfully close and listening to it and picking that stuff out. I'm not saying he can play like Buddy Rich, but but he was much more.
He had facility.
Yes, he had much more, and I never went down that road. I mean, probably mainly because it's like it's too much work to get there, But it's so.
Well, When you came to Nashville and you began integrating into the session scene, you worked on Southern gospel and also contemporary Christian.
Right.
And you touched on this a little while back while you were talking, and it made me think of this question that I'd had that I wanted to ask you. Can you explain the differences in those styles, and also any differences in like the prototypical artist of those styles?
Southern gospel is, and boy, I want to be really careful. I've said many times that, well, I'm really checking my words here because the people in Southern gospel music are some of the finest, just most gracious people that I've ever worked with. I mean, they make it a point to tell you how much they appreciate everything you're doing, and they're just really sweet people. Musically, it's fairly simplistic. I did touch on that before. It's kind of it would in a lot of ways I would compare it more to like traditional country. You know, I mean, and by that I mean like old country, Hank Williams or whoever, those guys from the day.
So a lot of cross stick.
Absolutely, a lot of crossing, not a whole lot of hard snare hits, and it's just a lot of that kind of stuff. Contemporary Christian was more the joke within the CCM industry was, whoever was hot in the pop world, 3 years later there would be a contemporary Christian version, and that's kind of what it was. It's like, they wanted that, they wanted to be modern, and I'm not doubting anyone's sincerity, but it's like, but musically, they were, in my opinion, they were always, a few steps behind because that was what they were modeling themselves after,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally know what you mean.
Yeah.
It makes it almost seem a little dated by the time that it
Absolutely.
comes around. But they tend to have somewhat of a captive audience, for lack of a better word.
Right, absolutely.
I grew up knowing, even though I don't sound it, I grew up in East Tennessee, so in the South, and I grew up, I was the kid whose parents would let me listen to Kiss and Black Sabbath and
Right.
Ozzy and all that.
Yeah.
I literally probably had friends who their parents probably were praying for me because I was listening to Ozzy or whatever.
Right, sure.
But they couldn't listen to any of that. They only could listen to what their parents said was okay. And
Right.
9 times out of 10, it was some contemporary Christian band. If the kid wanted to listen to metal, then maybe he got to listen to a band called Petra.
Yeah.
Or maybe...
Or White Heart or White Cross.
Right,
There's
exactly.
A couple of
Yeah.
Christian metal bands.
And I remember I kind of felt bad for him. I was like, those guys are kind of cheesy. But that was just me being
Right,
judgmental.
Stripers and that one.
Right. So what's the stylistically, you sort of spelled it out for us with Southern gospel. It's simplistic. It's almost like old country. What's a contemporary Christian sound?
Well, it was, it was and pretty much still is whatever is pop on the radio.
So it's just pop.
Yeah, they just try to do their version of it. Now, and I don't want to dismiss. There was a lot of, the whole Southern gospel thing. It wasn't all boom chick. It's like there's still. I've done over the last few years. This a family called. They didn't plan to talk about this, but a family called the Collingsworth family. Phenomenal singers, fantastic singers, great arrangements, very much kind of like, they would be more stylistically like the Carpenters, as opposed to like it sounds horrible, like a boom chick, like I said, a lot of crossed again. It's not, they would be it's more orchestrated
Right.
and produced, and they just sing like you wouldn't believe. They're just so good. It's that family harmony thing, and I listen to those records, I'm like, they're just, this is the best example of this kind of thing. And it's phenomenal. It's so good. And I'm in no way implying that people in Southern gospel aren't talented. It's just the most of that music would be viewed as a little more simplistic.
It's more revival style music.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that.
It's a backwoods revival sound.
Yeah. And then you have people that kind of branch off. I've done lots of stuff where, they'll get wild and do some kind of a Latin tune every now and then, or they'll do whatever, But it's,
Would you say that, I'm curious, would you say that now I know you're saying contemporary Christians, basically the pop
Right.
sound of today. Does worship music from church, modern day worship music, does it have any similarity to contemporary Christian that you'd hear on the radio?
I would say no. Modern worship music has taken a turn.
It sounds like every guitar sound from modern worship music, it's like they listen to U2's The Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And it's all saturated in reverb
Right,
and
delay. Lots of digital delays. And
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I really have to be careful what I say here, because it's like the lots of the CCM stuff in the 80s and the 90s was pretty deep. Or not lots of it, but there were pockets of it. that were, I mean, the musicianship was great. I'm not saying the stuff I played on, but there's some great records, great singers, great songwriting. I mean, very, very, the depth of a lot of that stuff was just, it's as good as anything you'll ever hear. Contemporary, rather modern worship stuff, it took a turn somewhere along the way, and it just got really dumbed down, and while I appreciate the message of what they're saying, and when, although there are those who are like, even that message has gotten dumbed down, and there are people who say it's a little bit, suspect in terms of its the biblical reference, stuff. But yeah, it's just it so much of it. It feels like, and I'm trying to choose my words, but it's like. It feels like somewhere along the way somebody said, hey, this music has to be able to be played by a worship pastor with an acoustic guitar. It can't be too involved. And so they're going to add drums to that. And almost invariably it's 4 on the floor, boom, boom, boom. It's a I jokingly call it the jungle tones of praise in the bridge of a song, because it's like, and so much of it just sounds the same. And I can say unequivocally that was not the case back in the day. It's like it was such a broad, spectrum of artists, and everything from the metal. I mean, like I mentioned White Cross. I played on a White Cross record that was this metal.
You did?
Oh yeah, heck yeah.
Wow.
And then I played on on other stuff. I mean, I played on there was a record called The Song for the Beginner's Bible. I just remember this because it was like full big band, all in the room at the same time. Just not unlike.
So it ran the gamut.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And everything in between. And it was well done. It was really well done. Great players, very talented. Myself notwithstanding, yeah, it was really, really good. And that's what I don't hear today.
So is it just a victim of modern day marketing where everything has to be put into a slot?
I would say that's a good description. And because a lot of, they're, and it's not to say there aren't talented people involved. Like I listen to modern, just regular, straight up pop stuff. And I almost feel the same way. Now, there's incredibly talented people, but some of that, it just gets so...
It's homogenized for sure.
Yeah, it's so into, it has to fit this one thing. And then, of course, you get into the whole technology with Pro Tools, and now, any kid can sit in his bedroom and make a good sounding record, and all of a sudden someone goes, hey, that's cheap, let's put it out. All we're going to do is make money off of it, and it sounds fine.
Yeah.
So...
Well, okay, You've been in Nashville, you got going in the scene, and fast forward to all these years later, and here we are talking today. Now, I'm curious, what are the similarities between working in Nashville when you first got going and now? And differences. I mean, what's the same, what's different?
Well, it's an interesting time to ask that question, of course, because we're still dealing with COVID. We're still dealing with... well, that's probably the main thing but that really changed. Of course, about 10 years ago, with technology, we all got to where we can record at home. That was a paradigm shift in the recording industry. And then the COVID thing. That's I probably shouldn't have brought that up right now because that's that takes us to a different place. But back in when was it, 07, 08, the economy took a turn. Lots of studios closed. Lots of people, lots of these, like we talk about the Southern gospel groups, a lot of that is just family groups, or not necessarily what we would call an independent or indie or custom, whatever you want to call it. They just saved their money to do a record. They would probably, there's so many of them out there, and then, they're doing a record every 3 years, and so it just kind of kept us all working. Well, all of a sudden, that just really slows down. People are going, well, we don't have to do a record this year. And,
in 07, 08?
Yes, yeah. And so, so that's when, the whole thing changed then. And studios went out of business. And it just kind of, and that's when it kind of ushered in this whole, we can record at home, and we can do this. And, of course, Pro Tools is coming out, and we all can do, we all buy microphones and mic pre's, and we all do that, and we can... You start passing stuff around, and emailing tracks.
Did you struggle with that change?
I was a little slow to the game on that. I didn't. To be honest, it's not that I didn't want to do it. When it first started happening, I really didn't have the space for it. Just that our house was, didn't have a room that would accommodate that. When I got married in '94. And the first house Donna and I lived in, there was no place to do anything like that. And then in '98, we moved to a house in Fairview, and which had a full basement. And so I was able to, and even still, I was a little bit, reluctant because I was still working. I was still doing.
So you didn't lose work because of not having your own drum set up?
I probably did, but I was still working.
It wasn't crazy noticeable.
Yeah, exactly. It was. I know there was. I definitely remember people go, "Hey, can you record at home?" I'm like, "Nah, not yet." Okay,
Yeah.
But I was still working, so I didn't really give it a second thought. And it just kind of became. Thankfully, I've been able to work through all the various things that are going on. And I just incorporated that into what I do, it's its own thing. We just did back in 2016. I'm also in a band called the Dogs of Peace, and it's like we did a record on Sparrow Records back in '95, I think it was '95, '96, something like that, and it did nothing. Basically, it was just one of those records that kind of. It's a pretty good record, I think most people think, but they didn't know how to market it because we were all fairly established session guys and weren't really interested in touring, and so the record company wasn't sure what to do. Although it was their idea, they kind of changed their tune on how to deal with that. So, I don't think the record probably didn't sell. I honestly do not know. I would say if it sold 10,000 units, I'd be shocked. I mean, it was just, but all of us stayed friends. Fast forward to 2016, we all kind of were talking. We're like, hey, everybody can record at home. Let's do another Dogs of Peace record, So that came out, and it got picked up by a record company. Did some other stuff. All the 10 Acres in the Smoking Section. Those things are recorded at home, So it becomes a very useful tool. What you lose in the camaraderie and the working together with other players, you gain in the like for example, there's a song on this most recent Dogs of Peace record that Gordon Kennedy had recorded. He's a brilliant writer. He wrote Chains of the World for Eric Clapton. He wrote lots of other these. He's a brilliant musician and player, singer and songwriter. He had written this song probably 20 years ago and just had a little demo of it, and he's like, hey, well, you want to do this? We're like, yeah, let's do that. It's great. Need to refresh it a little bit here and there. I took that. We created a Pro Tools session, and I'm like, yeah, I'll come up with. Let me work on that. And I remember at two distinct times, literally in the shower, I was just had this song in my head, and this idea, and I'm like, this is it. I've got it. So get out of the shower, whatever, run down there, fire up the Pro Tools rig, play this thing, and then stop and just go, yeah, that sucks,
Yeah.
But the great part of it was the ability to do that, to just have an idea and run downstairs and record it.
And not waste anybody's time.
Exactly.
Let's all pile into the studio.
Exactly. Don't have to book an engineer, don't have to book a studio, no cartage, it's just there. So
it sounds like you've done really well with assimilating into the current technology and having it work for your career.
Yeah.
As far as, like, say, the personnel that you had to encounter and the producers you worked with in your early days, the mid 80s, late 80s, through the 90s and up through now, is there a real difference in the sort of the temperament, the personality of, say, a producer that you dealt with in the late 80s versus one you deal with now in the Nashville scene?
Right.
Or is it more or less the same kind of headspace they've always been in?
I would say that, and we've all, I'd say we the players, session players, guys who do this, have done this most of their lives. We've all heard the stories of these horrific monster producers that just, and I think ultimately all of us studio players have a fantasy of being able to get up and walk out of the studio and just go, I'm not working with you, I have never done that. I've come close, but just like a musician who, I'll say a jerk, I'll be polite, you're not gonna make it. It's like there are so many great players in Nashville, there are so many good drummers that if I'm copping an attitude about something, well, there's Steve Brewster, Scott Williamson, Dan Needham, whoever, that are just great players. I can get away with that. And to a degree, producers are the same way. Now, there might be some like super lofty, guy that like I've never worked with Mutt Lange, but like actually he did call me one time, but but they may be hard to work with. They may be demanding, but they're not irrational. They're not.
Well, there's
abusive.
a difference between being demanding, hardworking, and being a complete jerk.
Right. So, and I have dealt with the people who are just complete jerks, and you're just like, yeah.
All right. So let's just
the phone.
Well, let's just assume then that we've got someone listening to this podcast who is thinking of moving to Nashville or moving to a town where there's a session scene, and let's just prepare them for the inevitable. They're going to be on a session, and there's going to be a monster producer who's going to treat them very poorly.
Yeah.
What's your advice?
Well, wow. You said you're going to ask me some good questions, and that's a good one. I would say, and this is just kind of a psychological thing, never put yourself in a position that you're just going to be abused. It's like, I don't think that's good for anybody.
So if you have to get up and walk out,
if you have to, don't, and it's not, that's just one of those things. Now, if you're to the point where it's like, man, they're about to cut off my electricity, they're about, I'll just suck it up and deal with it, then do that. Then get your paycheck, and if that's where you are, you just have to do that. You have to be able to put up with that again to get the money. Then, we've all got to do what we got to do to make a living and provide for a family. But yeah, if possible, I would just say, of course you don't know until you get there, if you're really, really, really young and new to the business, gosh, I'm trying to analyze this as I talk. It's like probably not good to get a reputation as somebody who's going to get up and walk out on your first session,
It's got to be the absolute, bottom of the barrel situation for you to get up and leave, where you're otherwise, and I tend to think maybe if you're being treated that poorly, it'll become known that producer
absolutely is, your other players,
the players on the sessions would speak in your behalf later on.
Absolutely. I've been on, I remember trying to think, I was on a session where I felt like that this one producer was being a little bit borderline. He was about to get weird with the bass player. And I was very on edge and already planning what I was going to say because I was not going to put up with it. Younger bass player, and the rest of us were fairly, seasoned. And thankfully it didn't go that far. It settled itself.
I'd read in a Modern Drummer interview with some Nashville guy that he was relaying a story about Larry London Larry London was a famous session drummer who's passed, but
brilliant player.
Yeah, like crazy good. Recorded with Steve Perry from Germany.
Oh Sherry, that's a great track.
Right.
And tons of country stuff. That was great.
He recorded even on some of the last Journey stuff in the 80s.
That's right.
Yeah, he did. But he threatened to kick an engineer's or a producer's rear for being got in his face and was like, "I'm going to take you outside and smash you." Yeah. And he was a big guy.
That's what I was saying. Larry could do it.
Yeah. Well,
you know what? Can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah, please.
I have this wonderful memory of Larry when I first started work. I'm in my mid-20s. There was a studio called, I'm not even sure if it's still there, Quad was the studio.
It's still there, but it's called Roundtree Music
really?
now. It's a private studio.
Okay, yeah. Then there were two main tracking rooms. There was what they call the Neve room, because of the Neve console, and the Trident room had a Trident console. I think maybe the Trident room became an SSL, but anyway, it didn't matter. Those were the two main tracking rooms. And this one, I was very, very new to the biz, but I was tracking in the Neve room, and Larry was in the Trident room. And as we're passing by, I remember Larry was sitting there, and it's just and I was not going to mess with him, because I'm just like and I just walked by and said, hey Larry, how you doing? And he stopped me and made me sit down and just started talking to me and just reached out in such a way as to be so inclusive, and just such a sweet guy. He was just one of those people, so it does not surprise me at all that he would come to somebody's defense. And like I said, like you said, he was a big dude. I think he was probably 6'5", and who knows, close to 300 pounds. He was a big old dude. He played hard, and but such a sweet guy. That was such a loss for the music community when he passed. But great guy. So.
Well, I'm curious, when you first got here and you started working here, was there an expected... Now, I don't do gear talk too much, but I do need to ask, was there an expected brand of drums and cymbals and heads that the producer wanted you to have? Or was it just was there a thing amongst Nashville drummers at the time where we've got to have these Yamaha recording customs, we've got to have these these pinstripes. We've got to have these Pisces or Zildjians or whatever.
I was never. It was never discussed with me that it had to be a certain thing, but this was a little bit when I was breaking in the mid '80s. What I would call the boutique drums, there weren't as many.
Right.
It was Yamahas, it was DWs, it was. I'm trying to remember.
DW was not even really happening.
Yeah, they were. That was
they had
really,
their pedal, but that was it.
Yeah. Who was it? Gosh, I'm trying to remember the companies. Pearl, obviously. Maybe Sonar and some others. I mean, they were good drums, but there weren't as many.
Right.
But you were. I mean, it's like I remember the first. I bought a set of Yamaha recording custom kit. They were these beautiful gray. We rarely see that piano gray or flat gloss gray painted finish. They were beautiful drums. And I think actually I played all DWs after that.
So there wasn't really a sound that everybody, but
No,
every drummer felt like, oh, he's got that, I got to get it too.
But Nashville did have its own little Nashville sound,
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me, and I want to be careful here as well, but I did kind of, the players in Nashville were great. I don't think the engineers were quite up to speed with like some of the LA engineers.
At that time.
Yeah. Definitely at that time. Because Nashville kind of got into this whole triggering thing. The D-drum came out with the D-drum brain. Everybody had to have triggers and be able to, and it was almost like that was the engineer's way out, rather than just being able to get a good drum sound, And all of us did that, to a degree. Larry London in particular was like, he was pretty into that. He was pretty on the forefront of the electronic stuff and implementing that into his sound. But, no, I think you were expected to have, pro gear. But,
well, yeah, of course. There's an article from the May 1988 issue of Modern Drummer, which is actually the first time I ever heard your name, because it was the second issue of Modern Drummer I ever bought. I was a kid, and I bought it at some mall in Atlanta. Wow. Actually, I was down there on a road trip with my family. And, I bought it because Charlie Benante of Anthrax was in there, and I was a metalhead kid.
Yeah.
But the thing to do, if you were serious about drums at the time, was that you would read cover to cover of Modern Drummer, because of course there was no internet. That was your source of information.
Right.
So I read every article religiously, and made sure to do it. And I read about you and your brother. It was a profile on Mark and you. Mm-hmm. And I remember, for some reason, it just struck me, the picture, you were playing some recording customs.
Right.
And I didn't know if they were yours or if they were like just the studio's kit.
Right.
And so that's why I kind of asked if there was a sound at that time.
Yeah, and I hope I've answered it. It's like it wasn't really, and back then, just to speak to what you just said, now just about every place has a house kit.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case back then. But yeah, there was a certain sound, whether it was pinstripes that were maybe you muffled them a little bit. It's like, and then I remember, when it kind of got to be the thing where, hey, these drums are wide open, there's no muffling, there's no whatever, and I enjoyed that much more. Now it's kind of interesting. It's a little in between now, because we all, at least maybe not all of us, but I experiment with these are wide open. Maybe I'll dampen them a little bit. With Meinl Drum Honey.
Makes your drum sound sweet.
But honestly, that kind of stuff.
Well, speaking of sounding wide open, at that time, in the late 80s, rims mounts came out, and they were a big deal. And for anybody who doesn't know what rims mounts were, basically it was a like a rim that would attach to your rim.
Resonance Isolation Mounting System is what it was, an acronym. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it would attach. It was a rim that would attach to your rim, and it would
suspend the tom.
Suspend the tom.
Right.
It made it so that you didn't have to have an arm go inside the tom and deaden the sound. And in that article, I remember you really talked about it. And
I got an endorsement with Gallagher because of that.
Because of that article.
Yes.
Dude, it did make an impression on them.
Yeah.
And it made an impression on me, because I remember thinking, what is that?
Yeah.
Do I need that? That's really interesting sounding. So they really worked, too.
Oh, yeah.
Do you still have the equivalent of something like that on your drums?
I do, absolutely. Right now, I've kind of gone back a little bit old school. For a while, all of us had big drum racks and all, and stuff. And I even was having, like, even my 16-inch, the 16-inch tom was a hanging tom as opposed to a floor tom. Now all of my kits are floor toms, but the mounted toms off the bass drum, I still have rims mounts on there or suspension mounts.
Really?
Just because I believe in them. I believe exactly, and because it is so funny because I'm a Gretsch endorser also, and the Gretsch, they ask us to get on social media and just talk stuff up. I mean, just not say crazy stuff, but just represent. And that's great. Try to do that for Meinl as well. I got on the Gretsch page, and now the big thing is, I've gone back to the mount to the shell, and it's so much better. And I'm just like, on a small tom, it's not going to be that much difference. And I even went through probably very nearly word for word what I said in that Modern Drummer article, and it was funny the reaction I got. People were very much like, "Don't tell me what to do." And it's just like I'm going, not telling you what to do. I just want you to understand why this works and why it doesn't, why it's not going to make that much difference on a 10-inch tom, and it's a huge difference on a 16-inch tom because of the weight of the drum. It's going to distort the shell, blah, blah, blah. If you've got something bolted to it, especially up at the top, all of that weight's just going to...
It's going to choke it.
Exactly.
Do you still... are they still made? Are rim systems or...
I'm not sure that Gary Gauger was the guy, and that was his product, rims, RIMS.
Well, every company now makes their derivative of it.
Right, yeah.
Like Tama has their thing.
Right, exactly. And they're all good. They all kind of work basically off the same premise, which is another reason why I'm like, look, everybody's doing it. It works, So right. These people that are coming, that are, the pushback I got from it was just I just really just laughed at it. What I wanted to say was, I've been doing this a lot longer than you have,
right.
But I'm not about to go there, And I'm like, and most of them were just like, I like the way it looks, And again, on a smaller drum, probably not going to tell that much difference, So if you're just doing it on smaller drums and then you've got floor toms, whatever you want to do, it's like. But if you are hanging rather, something bigger than a 14 or larger, I'm thinking you got to have some kind of,
Yeah, for sure.
The hanging thing. So,
which era throughout your time in Nashville has been your most favorite, and which has been your least favorite?
Wow. I enjoyed the music in the 90s that we did probably the most. And it was probably kind of what I referred to before. It was all over the map. I mean, it was, you just never knew what you were going to... You'd walk in the studio, and maybe people who don't understand... I've had people ask me, well, when did they send you this material? You're like, I've never heard it before today. You just show up and play, Hey, we're doing this today, we're doing that today, whatever. Now, if it's something really specific and they want some specific gear, like a parade drum or some other kind of something, then they'll tell you that. But most of the time, you just show up and it's like, all right, what are we doing? And it's like, hey, here's a Latin tune, here's this, and that's why I enjoyed that, because it was... You would show up and just, you learn certain producers and what they did, but a lot of the time you just never knew what you were going to be playing, and that was, quite honestly, if I can, just be honest about that, it's like, that's how those of us who were working and continued to work, that's why we worked, because you were that versatile. You could sit down and play this, or this is a country thing, this is a rock thing, this is whatever, this is funk, this is, straight up R&B, whatever, or big band, or, it's like, you kind of had to be able to do all of it, and you weren't always going to, it's very rare that you're going to sit down and somebody throw up a big band thing, probably I don't know, I was trying to come up with a crazy number, but it's like, maybe 20 times in my whole career had somebody said, yeah, this is a big band thing, let's do it, let's treat it like that, we're going to put horns, we're going to put all the stuff on it, Only the one time have I ever done it when it was all on the floor at the same time, and that was really a lot of fun.
Which style of music, okay, so you had to play in the 90s, you're being asked to do all these things. Which style of music did you feel on the inside that it came the least easy to you?
Probably, and it's mainly, it's not that it's that technical, but I've never been well versed in Latin music. Never studied it, and I consider it a gaping hole in my. I can fake it like most of us, whoever can, but Latin stuff is just there's all the different beats. I'm not talking about just bossas or psalms or stuff like that, but you get into these it's just so specific, And
it's almost a shame to call it just Latin music, because that's like
Correct.
calling something North American music. Well,
Exactly.
what is it? Does it come from Mexico, the U.S., Canada?
Right, and even that, you get into, is it Afro-Cuban, is it Brazilian? You get into all those different things. You would know that as a percussion guy with Meinl, all those different instruments.
It's a pretty broad term.
Right, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But if I may use that, it's like, that's just something I never studied that. I mean, my first two records were Led Zeppelin II and Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline. And so that's a pretty disparate, however you say that word, those two styles, loved them both. I mean, I still, the track Lay Lady Lay, I think it's Kenny Buttrey that played on that. Absolutely brilliant. To this day, one of the most brilliant tracks that I go back and listen to and just go, man. And that's another one, is like sonically, it's so good. Those drums sound so great on that record. I'm still not sure what he's playing, if it's bongos or cowbells or whatever. That the verse feel of that is just brilliant and so unique and so out of the box. It's just one of those things that represents all those things. We were talking about how some music gets so formulaic and so homogenized, was your word. It's great.
Right.
This was, of course, this is in the 60s, but still, it was like, you hear it, you just go, wow, that's, man.
Did Nashville Skyline, was that in the 60s? Didn't he do that? Was that early 70s when that came out by that time?
You know what?
Or was it still late 60s?
I'm thinking, well, you know what?
Because late 60s he was living up in Woodstock working with the band.
Yeah. Let me see. Is it okay if I do this real quick?
It's totally okay. We can always...
Bob Dylan, Nashville Skyline.
Was it like 71, 72 maybe?
Released in 69. So
Dude, there you go.
But you're closer than I was. So
No. You knew.
Well, I remember it in the 60s.
Okay.
But that also says that maybe I'm incorrect in that Led Zeppelin 2, what was that, 67?
That was Led Zeppelin. No. Zeppelin 2 was maybe like, again, that was like maybe 60. That was 69, 70.
Okay.
Because 4 came out in 73, something like that. So it's probably like 70.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward everything I said to
Yeah.
add a couple of years.
So you enjoyed the 90s. That's the
the
answer is because of the diversity of what you got to do.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And everything, like I mentioned, that White Cross, right? It's like and the first Dogs of Peace record was very rock, very we recorded that when there used to be a Woodland recording studio. It's a big room, and went for the Zeppelin kind of drum sounds, big drums, it was a vintage Rogers kit I was playing on that record with big bass drums and stuff, big bass drum. So but that's just, but you got to do all of that different kind of stuff. So.
So tell us about the road gigs you've been on since living in Nashville that have been worthwhile enough to have made you stop your daily session work and go out for a length of time. What's it been about those gigs that's made them pretty impossible to turn down? And when you took your first road gig after having established yourself here, were you pretty scared at the moment? Like, oh gosh, I hope this doesn't affect my current career.
I honestly, I don't think I was. I'm trying to remember what that would have been, because it was, like you said, I mean, typically you get to Nashville, you're most likely going to land a road gig first. That's just that's the typical path for most musicians on any instrument. And then you hope to establish yourself as a studio player, because quite honestly, you make more money. You start making, scale on records, and then you get other things, special payments, all the other things, the ancillary things that go along with that. You're just making more money as a studio player, unless you're landing some really, really high-profile gig. So, but it's almost like you're going to get one of those high-profile gigs, you're going to have established yourself as a known player.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember the first one of those that came along that I felt like, I need to do this. Might have been one of the Amy Grant tours early on.
You've worked with Amy Grant for quite some time, correct?
Yes, off and on for quite a while. Working with her right now in her, we're doing her tour. We just started it. And I think the first tour I did with her was back in 2003, maybe. And I don't want to get too much into the business, but she's generous and she pays well. And on top of that, it's just absolutely one of the sweetest people you'll ever want to meet. Exactly what you see is what you get. And you interview it. If you've ever seen her, that's the way she is. Wake up on the bus, and she comes walking out there with her hair all messed up, or you're at the end of the after the gig on the bus, everybody's exhausted. She's always exactly the same.
So she's on the band bus.
Probably at some point when she was touring, she probably had her own thing. But all the times that I've toured with her, yeah, she just was on the band bus, and with the background singers, and so it's it's a bunch of people. There's multiple buses. We're on 2 buses right now. But yeah, she rides the band bus and just hangs out, and it's like, which is another thing. It's like I've never been asked to work with an artist that I thought was just not a pleasant person, so I hadn't had to make that decision, thankfully. And some of the other live things I've done, I mean, it's again, mostly it's the bulk of my living has been studio musician, as a session player. Done some dates with Ricky Skaggs or Steve Wariner, and those people are wonderful because they're so brilliant. They're just amazing musicians, and each of them. I mean, obviously Steve is a guitar player and a great singer, but just a phenomenal player, and just and it's because of the high level of musicianship out on the road. They have great musicians with them, myself notwithstanding. But that's part of it, and they pay well too. But it's like, that's all. It's just to get to do that, it's fun.
Well, it sounds like then that I guess the short answer would be that, so to get those gigs that make it worth leaving, you've already established yourself.
Yeah, so you're not really in danger of...
You're not, okay, right. I got it. That makes sense.
To a degree. I mean, if you're gone all the time, then, then obviously these people who are used to calling me are calling someone else, and then maybe they get used to that person and they develop a relationship with them, and now all of a sudden John comes back, it's like, well, yeah, I kind of like this guy,
Yeah.
Most of the people you work with, you just become good friends with, and they're going to call you back when you come back into town, So. Yeah,
and I think what you said there, it's something I think we've touched on in this podcast and with the previous guests, but I remember someone close to me once said, she was talking about her career in pharmaceutical sales, and she said, look, it's really simple. She said, people buy from people they like. Right. That's just it.
Yeah.
And you can have all the technical knowledge in the world about whatever.
Right.
And you can be great with numbers or this or that. But if you're not cool, they don't want to work with you, and you won't get called.
That holds true in pretty much in every facet of life.
It does, and you just said it. You said we became good friends,
right.
And so they keep calling.
Yeah. You ask about it, like the rear end producers, who are just jerks, total jerks.
Right.
They don't stay. It's like they can't. And the same with the players. It's like you can't be that way and expect people to want to spend a full day in the studio with you. It's just nobody wants to do that.
I've often wondered how people with that kind of temperament actually stop and pat themselves on the back and think, gee, I'm doing the right thing. But, they must have some level of intelligence because they became quite proficient on their instrument.
Right.
So there's somebody home upstairs.
Yeah.
But apparently there's just got to be this disconnect in their brain that's maybe no fault of their own. Because they're just socially complete fools.
Right. I can't explain it.
I can't.
Yeah, it's I don't. I just, I guess I'm fortunate. I don't. I'm not sitting here, patting myself on the back saying what a nice guy I am. But I would just.
But you're a nice guy.
Well, thank you. I would so much rather get along with someone than feel the tension. That's just my nature.
Let's fight. That'll be a great time.
And I'm like, and how do you then get in there and create music and because it's such a it's such a heartfelt thing regardless of what you're doing. That's why I love all these various styles. There have been lots of records that I've played on that I never want to hear it again. I just don't. But maybe something we did, it's like it might have been a really, well, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's like, I remember this one thing, and it was a Gaither vocal band record, and with Bill Gaither, a lot of people may know who that is or not, but it's gospel, it's Southern gospel music, and it was this really slow, brushes, really, really light, and it's one of the more difficult things I've ever done, just because of that groove. And I think I did go back and hear it at some point when the record came out, but it's not something I'd listen to really anymore. But I loved doing it because it was so hard to do. It was so difficult to play with that kind of touch, with that kind of finesse, and make it feel right. Another good friend, Dan Needham, I mentioned that Dan's a drummer, great drummer, plays with Michael McDonald, a few other people like that. We have our little drummers breakfast where all the studio guys get together because we never work together, so we'll just get together and have breakfast. So fun. It's such a great group of people, and everybody gets along wonderfully. And Dan was joking. He said, so I was laughing at it. He said, guys, I had to do this song. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do the other day. It was a country shuffle in 3 at 84 BPM. And we all started laughing because all of us totally got it.
You've been there.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was something, and it's just, so we just laugh because it's like, yeah, been there. To make that feel good, dude, it's just hard.
It's easy to go fast and chop out.
Right.
But to do that.
Right. To be able to control that, and there's something about that weird, in the mid-'80s tempo thing. It's just, I don't know if it goes, I don't know anything about biorhythms, I don't know anything about that kind of stuff, but it's like, you just have to be so aware of where you are because you'll either fall behind or you'll get on top, you'll whatever. And then just to maintain that shuffle and make it feel smooth without feeling, without feeling quantized and too perfect. It's that weird kind of thing,
Yeah.
But anyway.
Huh. So, was there ever a moment where you sat back and you thought, I don't need to worry so much about the phone ringing anymore? Like, I'm at a spot now where it's like they're calling me and it's coming to me and I don't need to worry about this anymore. Do you remember an actual moment where you kind of felt good about, like, okay, maybe I'm actually doing it now?
It's hard to put my finger on a specific time, but there is a point at which you are like, yeah, you're just aware that the phone's ringing. You're aware that you look at your calendar and it's full.
And it's been ringing long enough that you're not worried about it ringing anymore.
Yeah, and it's but it's it's like, whether there's a specific moment or not, it's hard to say.
Yeah,
but you do get to a point where, you realize you're not worried about it, and and thankfully I've been incredibly blessed. I mean, I'm still at that point where I'm just not worried about it. I mean. Some guy from Spain contacted me. I looked at the Facebook message this morning. Wants me to do some stuff. It still happens. Actually, I haven't got back to that guy yet. But so that's phone's still ringing. I'm thankful. I'm still working.
And back in the day, it was an answering machine.
Exactly, a Codaphone with the beeper. We were laughing about that the other day.
Oh yeah, that's right. You had a beeper at one point. So you started out with an answering machine, and then you went to a beeper.
Well. I actually never had a beeper. I was talking about answering machines had a beeper, so you could check it remotely.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm getting technical with the Codaphone.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw that device.
I remember saving my money and getting this really cool Panasonic Codaphone that had the little, you'd call your own number. Hi, this is John. Beep. And it would play your messages back.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So then, when you got your first cell phone, it was like, oh boy, now I can.
Things
really...
are going to start happening for me.
Yeah, that's funny. Oh man. Well, I want to wrap this up by just. First of all, saying thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Really enjoyable.
Yeah.
I love getting to chat with you about this. And I've asked John a lot of questions about his past, only because he's got such a rich past in terms of experience in this town that people talk so much about. But I really want to also qualify all this by saying just what he said. He's still working all the time. Yeah. We're not in the twilight years.
Right.
He's still working.
You never know when that's going to come. I mean, thankfully, I'm still going. The joke within the music industry would be, who's John Hammond? Get me John Hammond. Get me a young John Hammond. Who's John Hammond? And that's the whatever you call that, the lifespan of a musician or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm probably to the point, getting close to the get me a young John Hammond, but right now I'm still working. I'm still very thankful.
Do you ever see a moment where you're like, you know what? I'm gonna go play golf every day. I'm done showing up to the studio. I think I just want to play golf every day.
Well, it's funny. I've referenced now twice the session I had yesterday, talking to the guitar player as we're leaving. Dave Cleveland is a brilliant player. And he's actually recently, and he's like super busy, just one of the busiest studio guitar players in the whole CCM and in this world that we're in, that I'm in. And he and his wife just moved to Fredericksburg, I'm sorry. And he still commutes. He came down for this, and he still does some. He does a lot of work remotely at his home, and he can do all that kind of stuff. But you do get to the point where you're just like, I've done this so much, and it's not that we both agreed yesterday. So I'll always play. I'll always, that's what I do. I'm a musician, or some people might joke, "No, you're a drummer," but still, it's that's just what I do. That's my life. Would I enjoy doing something? Sometimes I go, it might be fun. I'm still going to play. I'm still going to do this, whatever I'm doing. But regardless of, and again, I'm incredibly fortunate, incredibly blessed. I get to play drums and get paid for it. Have relationships with people like you and businesses and companies that treat me wonderfully, and I get, so that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But there are times, like anything, where it's a job. You might get up, you're just like, oh, it's going to be all day today. Who knows, 10 songs or whatever. You just know it's going to be a long day. And at that point, it's like, it might not be that fun. I still try to maintain my perspective that I'm, there's probably 99.9% of the drummers in the world would kill to have the career I've had. And I'm aware of that and very thankful for that. But it's like anything else. It's like, there are times when you're like, I don't want to play another song. I don't want to do this. I've done it so much, And I've had that kind of career where, I remember back in the 90s, this is a little bit of a tangent, I apologize, but because I have done, this sounds horrible, I'm not gloating, I'm not whatever, forgive me if it sounds that way, but I've had that kind of career when Nashville Cartage and Sound was a cartage company that I was with in the 90s. And I remember talking to the owner, a girl named Sheila, who was a wonderful girl, Sheila Bernard, and I just, whatever the topic came up, I'm like, well, who's your, who brings in the most money for you for this, for NCS, Nashville Cartage and Sound? And she said, well, you do. And I'm like, what? Because I was not, there's all these other guys, Paul Lime, Eddie Bears, that were playing, Larry London probably, that were playing on all these records, but they were the guys getting the calls where you might be tracking for 3 days a week or whatever, whereas I'm the guy who in that same, where they had one cartage for the week, I might have 5, So I was just in that was my world, and I worked a ton, all of us were, a lot of us were then, but I figured it out. I tried to figure it out one day, looking at everything that I had done, I may have played on 40 or 50,000 songs in my career,
Wow.
And it was a little staggering to me. I may be wrong about that, but I'm not too far wrong. I know I'm not, because I can do the math, and kind of look at all the stuff I've done and all the various clients. I've done a lot of the church choral stuff where you might, you get booked for a day and you'll do 12, 15 songs, and that might be, you might do that, 3 times a week, and then the other 2 days you're doing a full record for somebody else and doing 10 songs. So, so there's like 65, 70 songs right there in a week, So it's, and for the longest time, that was just it, And so we look at it like that, you do get to a point sometime where you're just like, oh man, and which is another reason why I love all the live stuff, because that's, somebody like Amy Grant, whom I love dearly, but her music is incredible, and it's incredibly diverse, it's deep. Some of the things are very simple, and some of them are very difficult, It's like, and so it's, I love doing that. I love playing that, and it's, so.
Well, before we sign off here, let's let our listeners know where they can go and watch you in action. I think maybe the most recent and really well filmed footage would be some of the Tim Akers in the smoking section.
Yes.
So if you go on YouTube and you search Tim Akers, and his last name is Akers, Tim Akers in the smoking section, you'll see the cream of the crop here in town. And they're all in different locations, and then they film their stuff and record it and send it in, and somebody edits it all together, and so they'll do covers of tunes.
Right. Tim has people call them different things: reimaginings, reharmonizations, whatever. The first one was Uptown Funk, the Bruno Mars tune that Tim took and did a different. That one's his actually kind of similar. His arrangement to Uptown is similar to the original.
People really loved that take on it.
Yeah, but it's a horn band treatment, and it's kind of like an Earth, Wind, and Fire kind of a thing. The second one was a take on Taylor Swift's Shake It Off. Kim Keys sang on that. She's a dear friend and brilliant singer, singing with Amy. So these are all people I've known Tim since I was in my 20s, and Kim probably since I was in my late 20s, and Gary Lund, the bass player, the same thing. I've known these people for since I was in my early 20s. So lots of good friends: Tom Hemby, Mark Baldwin, Blair Masters, who's the second keyboard player in Smoking Section. I'm in the Dogs of Peace with him, and we've known each other forever. So, and the horn guys are just the top horn guys in town. Steve Patrick and Mark Douthit is a brilliant player. He's out with Larry Carlton right now, and Michael McDonald, whoever. So yeah, it is like you said, the cream of the crop. The great players, and Tim has done these really killer arrangements. The most recent, then we did Hello, Adele, which was a drastic departure stylistically. And then David Bowie's Fame is the most recent one. Gene Miller sang on that, also out with Amy Grant. So, yeah, and they're so talented. And Tim, the arrangements he's done are so just killer. So,
yeah, it's crazy good.
Yeah.
So anybody out there that would like to see John in action and listen to him, watch that.
Watch those, yeah. Those are, I'm proud to have been a part of those.
And I say that because, part of the sad thing about, I feel, to me, this kind of makes me sad about the documentation or lack thereof of a studio musician's life.
Right.
It's not really something that's very kosher to have a bunch of camera people and cameras rolling while everybody's in the studio cutting tracks because, number one, this stuff's not been released yet, so you can't really put it out.
Right.
And
that's a good point.
Number two, time is money, and you guys got to get going. You can't have distractions, things like that. So you don't really get to see a studio musician's world as much as you see a live musician's world.
Right.
And so this is a kind of a neat little peek into what you can do.
The guy you just met, Kirk, he and I were just talking about, he found this podcast, and I can't remember the guy's name right now. James Hand, Christian James Hand, maybe, has a podcast. I don't know if I should even say that, but he breaks down. He kind of gets the Pro Tools sessions from lots and lots of stuff and breaks them down. So it does give people an insight to exactly, because most people don't know. I mean, I remember my family being in a family reunion, and you would say, well, yeah, I just played on, what have you been doing? Well, I heard you played on this record with this artist. Yeah. What are they like? I said, well, they weren't there. What do you mean they weren't there?
Yeah.
It's multi-track recording, we can do things at different, and I'm not saying people don't understand that unless somebody explains it to you,
Yeah, sure.
But for people who want to, seeing the inside, they fascinate me. I was telling Kirk about that, the Steely Dan Asia, where they break down the Asia record and all those songs, and it's Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, and they're, putting things up and soloing things and moving, I recommend people look at that kind of stuff and try to see, because it shines a light and it shows you how the stuff is done.
Yeah.
And
I love listening to isolated tracks.
Oh yeah.
When you find, every drummer out there's probably heard it by now, but you can find Bonham's "Fool in the Rain."
Right.
You can literally hear the pedals squeaking.
Absolutely.
Kind of hear him grunting a little bit. And
Kirk was telling me he thought that this one guy he does a breakdown of Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke. I don't think Stevie played drums on that, but Stevie played on lots of stuff. I think he played on Superstition and some other things. Stevie was a killer drummer, probably still is. But Kirk said that they soloed up the vocal of Sir Duke, and you hear Stevie snapping his fingers.
Wow. Yeah.
And even when it gets to that horn break, I'm not going to sing it, but he's snapping his fingers to the rhythm of the horn break.
Yeah.
Which you never hear on the record. You can't hear that while the band is playing, but that kind of stuff fascinates me.
Oh, it's great. I was listening to Ronnie Van Zant's isolated vocal from Skinner's Simple Man. It almost brought me to tears.
Oh, wow.
It's just so good.
Yeah.
And or like you can listen to the Beatles' isolated vocals like on Say Because.
Yeah.
They'll take away the string arrangements.
Right.
And you just hear, not string, but it's like a harpsichord or something.
Yeah.
And just to hear their vocals all together.
Right.
It's like a choir of angels.
Yeah.
It's great.
Oh, it's fascinating. And like I said, I love, just because it's what I do, and I'm very fortunate, and you are, that we get to see that stuff from the inside. We understand it. Not everybody's that lucky, but it's such a fascinating thing, and hopefully it'll make you appreciate how things are done and the talent that it takes to do that kind of stuff. Not to get back onto it, but as compared to a lot of the things now where you just throw up something in GarageBand and hit one button and it plays something, and all of a sudden that's worthy of being on the radio, and I'm just like, No, it's not. It's not the same. I mean, it's
No.
like there was a time when you had to be gifted, you had to be talented, and it's so much of it shows in the music of that we're talking about. I mean, whether it's Beatles, whether it's Stevie Wonder, or whoever, those things are so incredibly well done, and just the musical gift on display with that stuff. It's even though I'm not one of them, but I'm in the industry on the inside. It's still staggering to me to see that, and just I just have such an appreciation for that. So
Yeah. Hey, John, thank you so much for letting me sit down and chat with you. I love it.
Chris, it's been my pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked what you've heard, please remember to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Give us a rating as well on Apple Podcasts, if that's what you're listening to this on. Also, go to MeinlCymbals.com, or go to MeinlStickandBrush.com, or go to both of them, and sign up for our email newsletters to keep up with everything that's going on in our Meinl world. Thanks. Take care.